think we can get started here. So this is the December 10th Newton Planning Board. We will start by saluting the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So to kick things off here, first I will seek Mr. Gibbons for the excused Mr. Moran. We don't have to.
Nope, that's all you gotta do.
All right, it's done. And I think, so we're gonna shift it around just a little bit based on kind of the flow of the meeting here and what we have in front of us. So we're gonna start off with our public
So my recommendation would be to actually have the zoning ordinances come after the public hearings for the cases, just so that you have folks getting on with the business they're looking to get on with.
Sounds good. All right, so we'll start off with our public hearings. First up, we have Derek and Joy Dempsey. They request a public hearing for a non-retail home-based business, Chimney Sweeping at 147 South Main Street, Newton, New Hampshire. The property is referenced as tax map 14, block 1, lot 41. Jen, any immediate input?
No, I mean, this does qualify as really a home occupation, but because of the need to register a vehicle, it does need to do home-based business, so it requires a conditional use permit. It seems fairly straightforward. There's nothing of concern that I saw.
Okay. Would we like to take jurisdiction?
Well, so I would see if anyone's here to speak to the application
sure.
first.
Would anyone like to speak on the application before we start here? So just step up to the booth and just state your name and address first.
My name is Derek. I'm actually on the line. Just to know if anybody has any questions or anything like that, to be able to answer it.
Can you just sort of give the basics of what you're proposing to do?
Yeah, it's just a company. We do chimney maintenance, repairs, and inspections. It's the majority of what we do. We're up and down the seacoast, travel a lot of places. There's not a lot of no debris that comes home from job sites. Anything like that. All our vehicles are under 26,000 GBWR. There's not going to be any impact really at the residents.
Yeah, just a couple questions. Is it just yourself that will be working out of your home? Is it?
Yeah, it'd just be out of the house, yes.
Okay, so how many vehicles do you anticipate having that you're used for your business at your property?
One.
Okay. And that's under the 26,000
Yep.
gross vehicle weight?
Yep.
Will there be any deliveries of parts or anything like that?
No, nothing other than, maybe a couple Amazon orders or something like that, but nothing
Okay.
industrial or commercial.
What about like tool storage? Where's that gonna be?
Yeah, it's toolboxes in the garage, essentially, nothing outside.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay. I guess my only other question is, you have hours of operation as Monday through Friday, 8 to 4.
Yes, yeah.
Is there any chance that you would need to like leave for a job site before then, or come home later, or Saturday, Sunday? Because this is the time to ask for the maximum flexibility, even if you don't think you need it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it'd be vehicle leaving, if anything, wouldn't be, there's no, people coming to the residence for business or anything like that, so no business operations for hours.
I mean, it's essentially you
Yeah.
leaving the driveway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah?
Do you have any lifts or staging that needs to be stored, like outside or on the property?
Not on the
Mechanical
property.
lift, no.
Yeah, not on the property. We do have equipment like that, but it wouldn't be on the property.
So you have a primary business site?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a shop.
The application does seem complete for jurisdiction purposes.
Motion to take jurisdiction.
Second.
Unless you have other questions, you could open up a public
No,
hearing.
Barbara, do you have any questions? Just want to make sure that you... Barbara doesn't have
Her
any
microphone
questions?
is muted.
All right.
Quick question for you. Would you prefer while we're here and doing it now, and I know it's just you driving out of your driveway or whatever, but just if we were to put, instead of 8 to 4, just put 7 to 7, Monday through Friday?
Yeah, that's fine. I have no issues with that.
I think that would,
It just allows a little bit more flexibility for you.
yeah, would save you from coming back here in case of,
Yeah.
at some point.
All right, yeah.
And Saturday.
Yeah, what about Saturday? 8 to noon, still on Saturday?
Yeah, that's fine.
It just keeps you from having to come back here should you wanted to do a small hour change.
Yeah.
I apologize. Was there a roll call that we missed? You had a motion, you had a second.
We had a motion, we had a second, and then nothing happened.
Yeah, you still need a roll call for the second.
Right.
Yeah, because Barbara's on.
Mr. Ryan,
Yay.
Mr. Marshall,
Yeah,
Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
Ms. White. She may be
I wonder
AFK.
if she can hear us?
And Mr. Eddy.
Aye.
So that's unanimous.
She just
So you-
jumped off, so.
Okay. So you've taken jurisdiction.
So now you can open up a public hearing if you're ready.
I am ready. So would anyone, any comments or any abutters with anything to say? Quiet group.
You can close the public hearing if there is no comment.
Oh, may it stay that way for the rest of, Okay, well, in that case,
any of you guys got any questions?
if anybody has any other questions or points or concerns?
Negative.
Well, my only recommendation for conditions of approval, other than approving the application as presented with those change to the hours of operation, is that no outside storage of materials on the off chance you had something you were bringing home. That's a standard condition. And getting all local or state permits as needed, which is just working with the building inspector.
Does,
That's all part of the boilerplate.
yeah, do you want to?
So I'll make a motion
Yep.
that the board found the following facts concerning the application for approval, that the plan falls within the scope of the applicable zoning and site plan regulations for home-based business, and that justice would be served by approving this application. Conditions: obtain all local state land use permits, including but not limited to a safety line inspection. Conditional, excuse me for 1 second. That no outdoor storage of business-related materials like Jen was talking about. All business shall take place inside the home or home office or off-site, and hours of operation, as we described, 7 to 7, and Saturday was what?
8 to noon.
8 to noon. Need a second on that.
I'll second motion.
Mr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
I believe we can just do, because Barbara's not on anymore.
She just came back on.
Oh, did she? Okay. Aye.
Ms. White, I think there's difficulty with cable tonight. Could be due
Probably.
to the, Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
Mr. Eddy,
Aye.
Ms. White, Ms. White appears to be having technical difficulties. So that's unanimous.
So that'll get communicated to the tax assessor so you're able to register your cars as well?
Yeah, she's not able to come through.
Yep.
Let's see.
On Thursday.
All right, with that we can be off.
Thank you.
You're all set, Mr. Dempsey. If you want to leave, you don't have to hang around. It's up to you. Good luck with your business.
So next up, we have the 125 development. So they request a compliance hearing for the notice of decision regarding their 4-building site plan off South Main Street in Newton, New Hampshire. The property is referenced as tax map 14, block 1, lot 27-3. Mr. Gear.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Barry Geyer with Jones and Beach Engineers here for the applicant. We're here tonight regarding phase 2 of the Southern New Hampshire Industrial Park. We're requesting a revision to the notice of decision, item 1 of the conditions precedent, which indicates that we're required to obtain all federal, state, and local permits. We're requesting that this condition in regard to the DOT driveway permit be revised. We're requesting that that the DOT permit that has currently been granted, allowing the construction of buildings number 1 and 2 meet the requirement of this condition, and that the condition be further modified to indicate that buildings 3 and 4 cannot obtain occupancy until such time as the driveway permit be approved to include the traffic anticipated for buildings 3 and 4. We do have a note on the revised plans. If you look on sheet 6, which is C2, note 18, which I'll read, it says, the construction of buildings 1 and 2 are permitted under the DOT driveway permit. The construction of building 3 and 4 will require a reapplication of the driveway permit. Per consultation with NHDOT, the applicant shall complete updated driveway counts after the occupations of building 1 and 2 to determine the need for the driveway mitigation, proposed highway mitigation measures depicted on sheets, and then we list the sheets. The proposed mitigation measures to be constructed only upon approval of amended driveway permit.
So, Andy, just a couple of quick things. Can we test to see if Barbara can hear us? Barbara, are you able to hear us and respond? Okay. Give her a minute, but Mr. Gibbons has to recuse himself from this case as an abutter. So I just want to be clear that you legally do have a quorum here. So you can still take action on this, but just so that the applicant is aware that it's only 3 voting members, and if you're comfortable with proceeding on that.
We are.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Rowden, you have recommendation.
My recommendation is fairly straightforward. I think that the modification for the DOT permit as requested is fine, with one point I would like the board to consider. They're requesting to not be able to obtain an occupancy permit for buildings 3 and 4. My question is whether that should be obtain a building permit for buildings 3 and 4. And this is the reason. If you've anticipated that you'll be able to meet all of the traffic impacts from that DOT is requiring for the full driveway permit for everything, based on the use of buildings 1 and 2. But at this point, they haven't done that traffic study, because they can't yet, to meet that compliance. If buildings 3 and 4 are built, then not having a full driveway access and driveway permit, if they can't be occupied, then why should they be built until you know that they can actually get the full driveway permit from DOT? Does it make sense to allow the buildings to be built when they don't actually have a driveway permit that's fully executed. Very likely to be able to be fully executed, but at this time, that's not what DOT's permit has said.
Well, on 18, Jen, it says in the note, it says the construction of buildings 1 and 2 are permitted under the New Hampshire DOT driveway permit with the number. The construction of buildings 3 and building 4 will require a reapplication of the driveway permit.
From DOT's perspective, yes, that is
Right.
true.
So,
But,
if I may.
Yep.
The applicant recognizes what Jen is saying, but he puts it on his own back, basically, that to construct these buildings 3 and 4 would be at his own risk. So if, God forbid, the DOT permit could never be obtained, that he built the buildings, he just can't occupy them. Obviously, they're gonna do everything in their power to obtain the permit, but it's at their risk. Yeah. Go ahead.
Roy Tilsley on behalf of 125 Development, I'm counsel. The point I wanted to add to what Barry made is we know what DOT wants, we know the worst case scenario. For buildings 3 and 4, if, we know what we would need to do if we had to do it today. DOT has said, we'll look at your traffic counts on buildings 1 and 2, and we'll consider reducing what needs to be done for buildings 3 and 4. So we're trying to take advantage of that. But this is not a situation where DOT is going to come back with, we have to build the London Bridge or something like that, and we just walk away from buildings 3 and 4. We know what they're going to make. If DOT looks at this and says, nope, buildings 1 and 2 are busier than you said they might be, we want you to do the mitigation. We know what it is, and we know that we have to do it. We're trying to take advantage of the opportunity, but there's not going to be a surprise here where we just put our hands up and walk away. At some level, and I know this is a weird situation, at some level I think you almost, anytime you issue a building permit, there's always the chance that someone starts to build and runs on the money, loses interest, doesn't do a good job, and something weird happens. Here we know the worst case scenario. My client's not going to build these buildings without occupying them, and if the price to occupy them is to put the improvements that DOT wants in, he's going to do that because he has to do it.
So my concern is that, and I understand what they're trying to do, is that there is this scenario, you could have buildings be built that cannot get access legally via their driveway permit. That's my concern, and making the suggestion. But other than that one piece, I think the wording is fine. I think this would, however it settles out, will deal with the compliance aspect. It's just that subtlety that is my question for you.
And just to add on to what Attorney Tilsley indicated, the plans that are in front of you include the worst case scenario for the mitigation required by DOT. So we could construct what is shown in the plans, and that would meet the DOT mitigation requirements for all 4 buildings.
So why wouldn't you get the permit? Is this a time factor at this point, or? Yeah, why?
Yes, but if we got the permit and the mitigation required for DOT is extensive at this point. So they've allowed us to look at, once we build once we occupy buildings 1 and 2, look at that traffic, and if it doesn't require the mitigation, which is extensive, then we don't have to build it. So it could save $1 million.
So if I may, we did do a walkthrough. The gentleman from the DOT was there, and he did state what these gentlemen are talking about as we talked to him and asked him about the building of building 3 and 4. And he said pretty much exactly what they were saying, that at this point they weren't looking to having them redo anything other than what they're doing right now, and that they would have to check the traffic flow later on in the situation to see if in fact something would have to be done to the roadway, but at this point there's no need of it, is what he said.
So I guess, maybe I could use a little bit of clarification on one point. I guess one concern I have is it does seem like we're taking everybody's word for it right now. The other is, so if you're waiting on these permits, DOT says, everyone's trustworthy, we're going to, maybe make some small recommendations, what have you. What's the holdup on that? What are we
No, the
waiting for?
DOT already gave them approval for what they've got. So they've got the approval for the driveway as built, right?
Yeah,
For the traffic flow what they discussed with the DOT. That's said and done. It's the after one of buildings 3 and 4 that the DOT said that they felt that they didn't need to get that approval yet, that they would wait till after buildings 1 and 2 were completed, see what the traffic flow was like, and then they would go to them. And then if the traffic increased more than what it was, then they would discuss it. But at this time, the DOT, after approving it right now, doesn't see the need.
but in the meantime, you're looking to occupy building 3 and 4 before that comes in?
No, we're looking to build buildings 3 and 4 before that comes in. We wouldn't occupy them
And that's what. this-
until we have a legal access for buildings 3 and 4.
Got it.
And maybe I can take it out of the realm of, taking people's word for it. What we could do is when we pull the building permits, that the potential improvements, if we went to DOT today and said, give us a permit for all 4 buildings, they would say, based on projected traffic counts, the potential improvements would cost about $2 million. They're willing to say, let's look at actual traffic counts in the first 2 buildings, and the actual traffic counts may allow DOT to modify that and reduce that. We'd be willing, when we pull the permits for buildings 3 and 4, and kick me in the shin, Tommy, if you disagree with me, we'd be willing to bond that with the town, so that if, in the unlikely event that we build buildings 3 and 4, and then decide to walk away from the improvements and there's 2 buildings just sitting there, or if, someone built those buildings and occupied them without a permit, you'd have a bond to cover those improvements that are required by DOT for all 4 buildings.
Would it be more cost effective or more sensible to pull the permit at worst case scenario and then at that juncture let them downgrade the plans and maybe rebate your permit money?
It doesn't work, because if we pull the permit now, then we have to build those improvements for all 4 buildings, and then, so the savings don't materialize. So we're hoping to save a few bucks. That's really what it comes down to. We're not, as Mr. Marchand said, DOT
And
was
you're
at this
assuming all the
meeting.
risk.
What's that?
And basically you're assuming all the risk.
We're assuming the risk. If we bond it, then at least the town has some protection in that worst case scenario of 2 empty buildings and no access.
It's really the potential of 2 buildings being built that have no legal access that is the concern. If the bond, at least from my perspective, if the bond satisfies that for you, I think it's a perfectly reasonable approach.
So would you just make that a requirement?
You would make that a requirement of accepting this as a change to, or accepting this as a compliance with the original condition of approval, which was getting all federal, state, and local permits.
Right.
So you just make that a condition onto this amendment so that.
Ultimately, we're looking to protect the town and the
Right.
residents, so as long as
Right.
that is covering it.
You want there to be a legal, safe driveway permit to get to all 4 buildings.
Yep.
So,
You got that, Jim? I see him writing. Was there anything else, Jim?
that's all that I have. But because it is a compliance hearing, you do have to open it up to the public, but it is only on this piece of this proposal.
All right, at this point, I would like to open it up for the public.
My name is Ann Barden. I live at 10 Howard Lane. The first thing I wanted to mention was I didn't get notice of this meeting. I think that 125 Development needs to update their list because I got a certified tag in my mailbox, but it was addressed to the previous owner of the house. So I've been there since June of 2023, so they need to update the list because there may be other abutters that aren't getting notified of these meetings. And I don't know what meetings I've missed. I had some things that I wanted to discuss that did not come up here. But
So unfortunately, so this particular meeting is really only about the DOT driveway permit.
right. I had questions about the building permits in general, whether, because I was told that permits haven't been pulled for the first building that's obviously up. It's in my backyard. So is that a normal course of events? Is that true?
Andy, do you want me to?
What's it, yeah, please go ahead.
Not the typical course of events, but this board's jurisdiction right now, what they can do, what they can talk about, is really limited to this one piece of their conditional approval for the state, local, and federal permits, and very specifically the DOT driveway permit.
Sure.
If there are other concerns about compliance or anything like that, it's effectively a code enforcement complaint that would have to be filed. It would be outside of the hands of the planning board. This one piece, this DOT permit, is really what they have jurisdiction to talk about this evening.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say you can't air concerns, but that is really what they're limited to this evening.
Right, right. I understand that. So can I publicly talk about the other things that I wanted to, or do we have to keep it to this particular issue?
I would keep it brief if you are going to even allow it, but
What's that?
this is me speaking to the chair, just recommending if you allow it, I would recommend it stay brief, but that's your call.
Yeah, I mean, I have something that I can give you guys and then read what I was gonna say, and then we'll be out, and then maybe you can follow up with code enforcement.
Thank you.
That's for you, so you can.
So we talked about not being notified. The fact that as of a couple of weeks ago, there were no building permits for this project, no recorded site plan, and no bond. And I know there's one building that's up. I'm bringing this up because there's a history of disregard on behalf of 125 Development as far as the zoning regulations go. There was a illegal rock crushing business that was going on there for 12 years, at least, that I know of, going on for so long that my neighbors were surprised to find out that it wasn't a legal activity. Despite complaints and a cease and desist order, the rock crushing only stopped when the construction of the building began. So my concerns are the town was not able to be effectual in enforcing the zoning regulations in that situation. I'm worried about the process of the actual building of the project and then afterwards enforcing the zoning regulations for businesses that occupy those places. I mean, the regulations are pretty clear. I've read them back and forth, inside and out. I've read about the site plan regulations. I'm concerned about the lighting. The lights on the building are, buildings at least, I think it's about 3 stories high. The lights are at the top of the building. They're shining so brightly into my neighbor's house that they had to buy new blinds to keep the light from coming. And they're on all night, They're not on tonight, but they were on last night, shining bright as I was pulling into my driveway. So, landscaping buffers, that's another problem. I know the property was clear-cut pretty close to the boundary lines. So these are all things that I think the town really needs to pay close attention to. And, that's my concern here, and that's why I'm bringing it up. And I will file a complaint with code enforcement as well, but I just wanted to go on the record with what I had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
members of the public like to speak on 125 about the driveway permit?
Yeah, Jack Kozak. As that young lady said, nobody seemed to give her an answer. What about the permits? Did they build a building without permits, or can't we talk about that here? What's going on?
So, I mean, as Jen had mentioned, I mean, really, what we're here to talk about tonight is specifically the permit with the DOT and the driveway. If there is any concerns about what is happening over there, I really would encourage you to.
Is there gonna be another meeting on that? What's gonna happen?
You would go into our code enforcement and file a complaint. And
Okay.
then you could.
So the selectmen haven't met with him. I was under the impression tonight that there was gonna be some concessions in that particular building. That's why I came, not the stuff you've been talking about. I guess I was misled, because there's all kind of concerns that they did everything illegally in that one building, and somebody wants to see something happen. Thank you.
I believe all that information is available at the building inspector's office, like, any.
What has been issued, what has been approved or conditionally are
Any permits pulled on any property. in
all
the town.
public information. But they are at this point outside of the jurisdiction of this board. Code enforcement officer, and effectively the select board is who is ultimately in charge of it.
Good evening, Tom Alberti, 2 Ridgewood Road, Plaistow, as an abutter. I just want to, you mentioned sort of covering bases for the town. I was just thinking that obviously the safest course of action for this board and for the town is to sort of follow the current permit and current conditions. I think that the promise that we'll do something if they have to is a concern, right? Because I think that what some other members of the community are saying is that they're concerned about actions that are taking ahead of permits and things like that. And I know that we're not necessarily getting into that tonight, but I think the safest course of action for the board is to follow the current conditions and allow that the 2 buildings be built under the current conditions. And then if and when the DOT is satisfied with the traffic conditions and other reports, will then now the other 2 buildings are allowed to be built. And I think that, again, that would be the safest course of action for the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from Zoom?
Okay, you just want to respond briefly to 2 points. Barry, this time correct me if I'm wrong. I assume that when you send the butters notices, you're using the addresses from the town, correct? So ma'am, we get the addresses right from town hall when we send those out. So if there's a problem, okay.
How you do?
Mr. McDonough would like to speak.
Sorry, I believe he raised his hand on Zoom first there.
Can I tell him not to? I am his attorney. The other thing, Coleman, you gonna speak?
He would have to unmute himself to do that.
Well, let me just finish my point while he's working it. The other point since there's some comments made, as Mr. Marchand meant, we had a meeting on site with various town officials, including himself and people from the state and my client as well. So we are working to address these types of issues, and again, appreciate that you're not the enforcement body, but I also want this board to understand that we are trying to address the concerns that have been raised.
Yes.
Regarding the abutter notices, Ms. Barton was not on the list. The previous owners from roughly 2 years ago were still on the list. The applicant has been informed that that list is incorrect. It wasn't pulled statutory. They're supposed to pull the list 5 days prior to doing the labels. If they had done that, then Ms. Barton would have received an abutter notice. They're using a list that appears to be the same list from 2002, and I'm not allowed to edit the list.
Understood.
As far as the process that Barry's office uses, they do update it. I can't speak to the update, his administrative person does that, but that's their standard process, is to update this whenever they send them out. So if it fell through the cracks, I'm not sure why. Obviously, she got notice, she's here, and we will make sure that next time we will specifically check that she's on the list.
Well, I did ask Barry a while ago to make sure that that young lady was put on the list.
Yeah, if we missed it, I apologize, but honestly,
You can apologize to her.
I apologize that you didn't get notice, and we will make sure you're on the revised list.
Thank you. So, unless there are other abutters, you would need to make a motion to amend the conditions of approval with the condition of the bond, if that's the way you want to go.
Bob, do you want to
Make that motion. I will. I'm gonna make that motion as stated by Jen to change the conditions to add the bond.
Do we have a
So,
bond amount, or what we would set that as?
so I think that the true wording would be that you are moving to, approve that the compliance with the original condition of all federal, state, and local permits is met via the modified DOT driveway permit process, with the condition that the improvements needed to meet the DOT permit requirements for building and occupying buildings 3 and 4 are supplied to the town in the form of a bond or surety. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Performance guarantee.
Performance guarantee. My apologies.
How do we determine the amount?
So they can supply what the estimate is and just have Mike Fignelli, your town engineer, confirm that amount.
Yep. Need a
Alright.
second?
We have a motion?
I motioned it.
I'll second.
Okay. Ms. White is no longer here. Mr. Ryan, are you seconding it?
I did second it.
Okay.
Mr. Eddy?
Aye.
Mr. Marchand?
Aye.
And Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Just for all of the abutters that are here, for this specific part of this, there won't be a subsequent meeting. If there were to be some other application related to this, you would get notified.
Can I please be let in the meeting?
You are in the meeting.
Hello?
Who's
been let.
speaking?
That is a guest on a telephone.
We can hear you.
Is that Mr. McDonough?
I've never seen that before.
It's dialing in from the phone. He just walked in his own phone,
Andy, you'll have to announce that Mr. Gibbs is back.
Is there a reason why I am not being let into the meeting?
You are in the meeting and talking.
I'm wondering if folks on Zoom can hear us.
I'm getting the impression that
I can hear you now.
Oh, is that Mr. McDonough?
I've tried I've tried about 7 times through the computer and through my phone, and have not been let into the meeting.
We've let you in several times.
Okay, I'm in it now.
Yep.
If I'm hearing you now, I am finally in it.
You are in it. The board just voted to approve the conditions with the driveway permit, but are going to require bonding of the improvements that your council recommended.
Okay.
So that's been the outcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a nice night.
All right. If we are ready to continue, we will be reseating Mr. Gibbons. And next up, we have our zoning ordinance public hearings. So first off, we have to...
Nope, you got the subdivision.
What?
Yeah. You went one page too far.
I skipped a
Mackenzie
page,
Properties.
sorry.
You skipped a 2-lot subdivision. Mackenzie, it's the continuation from the last meeting.
Get a chance to.
Did I lose my place? I'm sorry.
I got it back.
I'll do my very best.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You have a different one. Oh, here it is. Sorry about that. So next up, we have a continuation of Mackenzie Properties, LLC of Seabrook, New Hampshire. So they have a request for a public hearing for a 2-lot subdivision for their property at 16 to 14 Amesbury Road, Newton, New Hampshire. Property is referenced as tax map 10, block 7, lot 20-1. Ms. Roden, any immediate
Nope,
comments?
you guys took jurisdiction of this at the last meeting. There have been a couple amendments that I know Wayne will get into in a second. I have one comment, but I think at this point, he should take the show over.
All right,
Great.
by all means.
Good evening, Wayne Morrill from Jones Beach Engineers. As Jen said, we did have a number of things that came up the last hearing that we addressed for the board. So I'll go over those things so the board can see. So one of the first one was setback lines. So we originally just had a note calling out what the setbacks were. So now on each one of the lots, the setback lines are actually shown on the plans, and they're labeled as building setback. The second one was the impervious surface. So we had a calculation as the impervious surface. We both had a question of if it was for the whole lot, what lot. So what we've done is we've added the impervious coverage of the 2 lots. The first lot being where the existing house and the the shop is. That is just over 19% impervious. And then your planner asked that we actually give the impervious of the existing gravel parking and access on the second lot, and that is around 14% impervious. So we're thinking that that will probably go down in the future because we're not going to leave that all open like it is currently right now. Both of those calculations are on the subdivision plan and on the site plan. The third thing was the showing the wells and the septic offsite. So we had somebody go out, try to find them as much as we can. We submitted a waiver to the board to not have to show those on every lot within 200 feet of the subject parcel. As the board knows, this proposed lot is surrounded either by the existing use that's on one side, or there's a large wetland that surrounds the rest of it. So this is a very isolated upland area for this building pad. The next one was indicating the wetland permit number where the culvert was actually replaced, and that was added to the plan so that the board can see the wetland permit And I actually included a copy of the wetland permit itself with the information, so you could see that that was an actual permit from New Hampshire DES. The next one was the proposed driveway. Was it going to be paved? We've now added notation on the plans that the driveway will be paved. We actually went out there. The actual top of the bed is actually 20 feet in width. So in order to be compliant with, to make sure that a fire truck could get down there, we're showing a 14-foot wide paved surface, which would allow 2-foot gravel shoulders on each side. And then that way, if any time the fire department had to go out there, if for some reason they'd have to put out their riggers, it would be compliant with their 14-foot separation that they need. So we felt that that was a good thing. The next question was a question from a resident on the board. They asked a question about, did we check with the Railroad Commission about anything required on the old railroad bed? So I sent my surveyor in and tried to dig through this, and we went all the way back to in the 1930s when this was actually established. That rail company actually went out of business, then basically left all their properties. The town of Newton actually took over that property in the 50-foot right-of-way, and then every time it went over a property, it sold that right-of-way back to the landowners. So in 1953, the previous owner obtained back the 50-foot right-of-way, and there is no covenants or any restrictions from a rail company on that. I can, Jen, if you'd like, for the record, I do have a complete research package. It's probably going to bore the heck out of you, but it goes all the way back to 1908, and it can show how the town actually got all that right-of-way and then actually sold it back to people. So.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's very neat. I don't know
gonna say,
that
it's
I
actually
need
kinda
that, but I
interesting.
think
That
it might be good for the town to have a copy of, if you wouldn't
We
mind.
actually came into that, the peanut trail as it goes over this way. That's the old railroad over that way. And they did the same thing to the landowners over there.
I just learned something about Newton.
So, yeah, so that was basically all the comments that we had. Really, it was just cleaning up some of the things the board saw the first night and asking for a waiver on the wells and septics on abutters within 200 feet of the property. So with that, I'll open it up to the board for any questions.
Was there supposed to be some language in there as it pertains to the hive or the cave or whatever the?
That was the other subdivision, so not this one, different one. I have one small question though.
Yeah.
So right now, for the new residential property, it has, I'm gonna say, a driving path that connects it to the commercial lot. And right now, because there's a relationship there, that access, if I'm correct from what you had said the last meeting, is desired to be maintained. The ability to get from the lot, the residential lot to the commercial lot via that path. My concern is that in the future, if that residential lot is to be sold, and there not be like a familial relationship, taking away that access so that you don't have a resident accessing their home via a commercial lot like that. So my thought was that having a gate installed on the commercial lot might help to minimize that, so they could still use it the way they're hoping to without, it's not gonna create an easement, because you don't really want that to continue in perpetuity.
Right.
But putting a gate up on the commercial side with signage that no commercial vehicles beyond this point, so that they're not going to be using the residential lot for storing commercial vehicles. That would be allowed just given what they're proposing, and you don't want that to continue. But just to help break that, should the residence ever be sold to someone not with this relationship, so you're not having any access that way?
Right, and then there's an argument of, traffic through there.
Correct.
Yep, makes sense.
I understand your concern. I think, Mr. Mackenzie, who's been running that business for quite some time, is looking to build his house with his wife on the other property, so they still work there.
Yep.
So for this point, they still need to get back and forth, and I think it's good traffic movement purposes to not send them out to Amesbury Road to go around the corner to come into their place of business. In the future, I'm sure if Mr. Mackenzie owns both of those properties and him and his wife want to stay in that residential home, they're gonna put up that gate themselves, and I don't think it needs to be part of this board as an action. because it's their privacy that they want to protect, and if he wants to sell his business and remove himself from that, he can do that on his own, and I don't think he's going to let people in the business come through his property if he is not part of the business anymore. So, that's my concern.
I don't have a problem with it.
All right, honestly, just bringing it up as a way to
But
not have a future problem.
we do need to give them a waiver.
You do need to go through the waiver
So I'm
process.
gonna make a motion that we grant the request for the waiver on the
no,
well.
you-
I have to open it up to the.
Yeah, you gotta have a public hearing about it. You're gonna open it up to public
I
comment.
gotta open it up to the public first. So, anything else that you want to?
Nope.
Okay. At this time, I will open it up to the public. Anybody on Zoom?
My motion still stands.
Okay, I did my job.
Did anybody second
And
that?
I'll second the motion.
I think there was a second from Keith.
Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mr. Ryan,
Aye.
and Mr. Eddy.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
So technically, you do still have to open it up to public comment for the whole application.
Okay.
I realize it will be limited potentially.
At this time, I would like to open it up for public comment for the whole application. Okay.
With that being said, I'm gonna make a motion to grant the subdivision of the lot.
Second.
Do you want some conditions?
Yes.
Yep,
The typical ones.
Jim's gonna read them off.
So I think there's one condition that should be put on this approval is that they obtain the New Hampshire DES state subdivision approval to subdivide the two lots.
Well, that'll be federal, state, and what Jim's about to read right now.
Okay.
Okay.
The board is finding in fact that the plan falls within the scope of the applicable subdivision regulations and that justice would be served by approving the application. Conditions precedent would be obtain all local, state, and federal permits, which covers that. Set new bounds, supply new deeds to the town assessor, and 4, add a gate between the lots with signage to prevent an easement via adverse possession or common use.
So for the board, we're not in agreement with that third condition.
Yeah, I think that were you guys wanting to do a gate or
No,
not?
you can strike
I think
that.
I'm moving that one.
Okay, we're getting rid of the gate.
Correct.
So is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
and Mr. Eddy.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Good luck, Mr. and Mrs. Mackenzie. Enjoy your new home.
All right. Now, we will move on to our zoning ordinance public hearing.
Sure.
Good night. You too.
Thank you.
Let me,
So first up, we have our establishment of zones.
yep, hold on one quick moment.
Okay.
So the first zoning ordinance proposal is the establishment of zones. This is a small modification that we're tying into the second zoning proposal that I'll get into more detail in a minute. But the intent is that because we are suggesting modifications to the groundwater district or the aquifer protection district, in your current zoning, you have a section that lists out, and I apologize for the scrolling, that lists out the current major zones under section 7 that you have in your zoning regulations. So residential A, B, and C, commercial, village district, light industrial, commercial. They are defined a little bit, and then it's always been my recommendation, and we haven't ever quite gotten to it, to list the overlay districts that you have. That includes your wetlands ordinance, your groundwater ordinance, and your shoreline protection district, just so that it's all appearing. So if someone went to go look to see what are the zoning districts in the town of Newton, you'd have your basic zoning, your commercial, residential. You'd also have the overlay districts listed there too. So that's really not, it doesn't change anything, but since we're dealing with the aquifer/groundwater ordinance, just bringing that forth. So that's a fairly straightforward change that I'm recommending we pull into this overall proposal, which I can go through the details of that in a second. But any questions on that part? Okay.
Jim?
Oh, I spoke to Mary Jo downstairs about how things should appear on the warrant. She suggested that it's possible to have, if you're changing an entire section of zoning, like that one is for number 7, put them as 2 separate questions so that people don't get confused by extremely long. I mean, the middle one's going to be extremely long anyway, but she just suggested that it'd be 3 warrant articles instead of 2.
I think that's perfectly fine if you wanted to move it forward that way. My only suggestion is because that we go through, that you don't vote on it right this moment. Let's get through the next one to see if that is something you move to warrant. Only because this adding the overlay districts, we've included the term groundwater protection ordinance, and that's one of the big changes in the groundwater/aquifer protection district is to change the name.
Right.
So that would just be my one suggestion. Other than that, it's
Makes
fine.
sense. Okay.
All right. So starting back at the beginning, back last fall, RPC worked with the town of Newton and actually also the town of Southampton to apply for DES to do some updates to both municipalities' groundwater /aquifer protection ordinances, based on some findings we had done in conjunction with DES about municipalities that already had groundwater protection ordinances on the books that may not be fully protecting some of the groundwater resources in their municipality. Newton kind of bubbled to the top, so we received some grant funds to do some technical assistance. It does help to fulfill some of your zoning ordinance changes that you've identified in your master plan, particularly your natural resources master plan, and the overall goal that always bubbles to the top of master plans of protecting drinking water. So this is really a intent of making it so that your groundwater resources, which are 99% of the drinking water source for the town of Newton, either through public water systems that are scattered around town or private wells on people's own property, to better that protection for preventing contaminations going forward from uses that have a higher than a typical risk of potentially contaminating groundwater. So that's the overall intent of this. While we were also doing it, we did go through and added things like definitions, clarified some terms, and also clarified some administrative processes to make this whole ordinance easier for the town to administer, for applicants to understand, but also just to make it work and function a little bit cleaner. So that's sort of the quick background. I can kind of hit the high points. I know the Conservation Commission had a few questions, so just so that I'm not sure if either folks that's here is Conservation Commission, I don't believe so, but so that they can watch this on TV later, and I'm happy to go and speak to them about this as well. So on the town website, we did post a whole background and adoption process information sheet so voters can have sort of the summary of how this came about, the intent, what the approval process would look like, highlight some of the proposed amendment changes, Like I mentioned, the board has been working on this for a number of months. You've had me present a few times, you've had DES come and present, because a lot of the changes we're recommending are based on the state model groundwater protection ordinance. Highlights are to clarify the goal of the district, to provide better definitions. In a few cases, they are brand new definitions, but for the most part, it's really clarifying existing terms that you currently have in that zoning regulation. Possibly the biggest change to the entire process is expanding the district to better protect drinking water resources. And I'm going to skip over this to get to some maps, because I think this is the thing that will be the biggest part that people will want to understand. So I'm going to skip over to some maps. So currently, the town of Newton's Aquifer Protection District is defined by the U.S. Geological Identified Stratified Drift Aquifer. What that is basically areas of the ground that are better able to have water infiltrate into them and hold it. They have a higher amount of water in the porosity. It's called transviscosity. They tend to be the areas where if we wanted to pump a lot of water out of the ground, those are good places to do it because they have a lot. We can get water out of other places in the ground as well. That's why everyone is able to have a well on their site. So on the map that I'm showing, the stratified drift aquifer is the areas of light blue. So the dark blue is things like Country Pond, but the lighter blue is the stratified drift aquifer, and sort of in this vicinity, I think you can see my mouse. Let me zoom in a little bit just so people are seeing it. In sort of just south of Country Pond, the area you're seeing the slightly darker of the light blue shades, that just means there's a higher transviscosity or more ability to absorb the water.
How's that better?
Is that better for folks? Can you at least see the contrast a little bit?
Made it a little bit bigger.
All right, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. Tell me if you would like me to pan around at all, but this is to give you an overall sense. So the existing groundwater protection district or aquifer protection district covers the stratified drift aquifers, which is fantastic. That's a very typical way of approaching groundwater protection. That's what many of your neighboring communities have used. But on top of that, and this is something that in the past 10 to 15 years, more and more communities are moving towards, is also protecting those areas known as wellhead protection areas. What those are areas around a public water system. So that can be things like a neighborhood that has the same well that they're sharing. Typically it's a neighborhood or a cul-de-sac. It can also be a public water system, can be a school, or it can be a place of business that has a certain population of 25 or more people using the same amount of water, but they don't reside there. The third kind of public water system are things like restaurants, where yes, the public is using that water, but they're not using it all the time. Those kinds of public water systems do not have wellhead protection areas. Wellhead protection areas are on those neighborhoods. They're on places like schools serving the same population day in and day out. On this map, and I'm going to just zoom out a little bit, there are a number of public water systems. These are all of the dots that are being shown. And then there are circles around some of them. Those are public water systems that are servicing the same population or residents that have wellhead protection areas. What those are the areas around a well that have a chance of, if there was to be a contaminant, there is a reasonable chance that contaminant can get to the well. So they're the more at-risk areas. You'll see some of the circles are big, some of the circles are small. There's a couple of reasons for that. The big one is how much water are they pumping? So what is the water demand? That's a big part of it. What type of substrate is it? Is it gravel? Is it fractured bedrock? So that plays into how big it is. The other component is how many wells are actually pulling from that area. So down to the southern part of Newton, there's a relatively big wellhead protection area. If you look really closely, and you guys might not be able to see it, there are actually two circles there. The reason for that is it's Sergeant Wood's wellhead protection area because they have a couple of wells that are pulling. So you have that multiplier effect. So that is why it is bigger, because it's serving a bigger population. You'll also notice that there are some wells that are showing in other communities. Wellhead protection areas do not care about municipal boundaries, nor does DES. So they just have the wellhead protection area, which is determined by DES's administrative rules. So there's a prescribed way of how they are determined, are simply the radius around the well. In some cases, there are wells in Newton that are falling partially into Plaistow. There are places in East Kingston that are falling into Newton, and vice versa. So the big part of this proposal that is a change is recommending adding wellhead protection areas to the groundwater protection district. So any place you see the pink hashing that is not currently in the blue would be added to the area where your groundwater protection district would apply. So that's the basic. Happy to answer any questions, but that's the basic idea for
Now, just
the
for the
district.
record, the towns that are around us, what is their scope of inclusion in this?
So here, I'm gonna move down to the third photo I'm showing. So the town of Plaistow does in fact include wellhead protection areas currently in their groundwater protection district.
Right?
The town of Southampton does not currently, but they have moved to public hearing for January 6th, the same sort of addition that we're discussing tonight. East Kingston does not actually have a groundwater protection district. I work with them. I am striving to get them to even adopt one, but as of now, they do not. Kingston does not do wellhead protection areas. They do the full aquifer and full stratified drift aquifer. So on this map that I'm showing, the pink.
Amesbury?
I honestly don't know about Amesbury, but Massachusetts law for protecting groundwater is vastly different than New Hampshire. So what I'm showing in the pink here, and I'll just zoom out a little bit. These are the local protections, so a local zoning regulation protecting groundwater for Newton. So this shows your existing aquifer protection district and the surrounding communities. So the groundwater does not care about municipal boundaries, so it is of mutual benefit when towns are increasing their protections. So there are protections that Newton can adopt that protect Plaistow. You have, particularly on your southern half of the community, you have a good number of Plaistow water systems that would increase their protections if you had some modifications to your zoning regulations, and vice versa. All right, so with that, I'm gonna go back to the basics, but we do have these maps as part of the information that's being presented so that people can go and really look at it. And it designates what each map that's in the map series that I just showed. We do have, as part of this proposal, improved design requirements and consistency with the expectations of what different uses, what their performance is with things like stormwater, how they are handling toxic or hazardous substances if that use is proposed. Also bringing in some things with septic systems that you guys had sort of buried in your existing regulations. And then number 5 is clarifying what uses are truly allowed, what uses are going to generally be allowed, but with some basic best performance measures, and then what uses are prohibited, because those are high-risk uses, and we didn't really add a lot to that. We really just clarified what some of those uses were. There's one use that we did add to the prohibited use, but for the most part, it's clarifying. Really acknowledging that existing uses are allowed to continue. If they legally exist today, they are allowed to continue as long as they are still, maintaining health and safety, which is a little bit outside of the intent of this. And the last one, which I'm kind of hoping more CONSCOM folks would be here, that we did want to point out is that it does seek more input from the Conservation Commission, because that is the land use board in town really targeted with protecting natural resources. Groundwater is a very vital natural resource, so it increases the connection when the planning board is making decisions with getting the input of a conservation commission. It doesn't give either board any more authority, but it does help to close that loop a little bit and ensure that that's a consideration when you guys are making decisions.
Makes sense.
Any questions? I'm gonna just sort of skim through the ordinance because we have been through it a number of times, but
Yeah, I mean, this
ask
is-
me to stop at any point. We did offer the full track changes version with this proposal, so people can see exactly what is proposed to be added, which would be in red text, what is being proposed to be removed, which would be struck out, and then what the existing text that would remain would be. So one of the big changes is changing from the Aquifer Protection District to the Groundwater Protection Ordinance. We have added additional language to the authority and purpose, and the big item with that we really clarified is that the planning board is actually able to offer a conditional use permit, which I'll get down to in a minute. This is shifting a little bit from the special exception that currently can be sought from the zoning board or a variance that could be sought by the zoning board. It also really brings in acknowledgement that the master plan is really the policy that sets protecting this particular natural resource going forward, just so it gives you a little bit more legal standing if there were to be a challenge. Adding definitions, including things like gas station, impervious surface, what a junkyard is. Most of these are pulling in existing definitions, or they're acknowledging definitions in state law or administrative rule. Pulling in what outdoor storage means, pulling in what PFAS stands for. So one of the enhancements that DES made to their model regulation, and we had a whole long presentation about this on October 22nd, if people want to watch that full presentation. PFAS is considered a emerging contaminant in New Hampshire. It's kind of been all over the news. There are a lot of different sources of it. It's basically an industrial byproduct. It can come in things that are as they're being manufactured. It has been traced to firefighting foams. It's a contaminant that is a known carcinogen at a certain level, so trying to really prevent some of those uses that may potentially leak PFAS into the groundwater, while also balancing the fact that it is a very common chemical, and balancing this, people may still use products that contain PFAS, but whether it is reaching that level where it is a hazard, better being able to judge that by some of the provisions that are in here. So that's kind of a new enhancement. Most communities do not have this.
Do we have tests? I know that Newton has done testing in the past. Is there like a regular testing interval where we can measure that?
So there are regular testing intervals that are prescribed for public water systems for PFAS because there are state levels that they're allowed to be at. There are home tests that also can be done.
Right. Yeah, true.
But I'm also just gonna share a different screen really quickly because I wanted folks to be able to see this. Let's see. There we go. So on the Department of Environmental Service website, you can go and look at the PFAS sampling that has been done all across the entire state. And it will tell you whether or not you've had any testing, and it hasn't been done at the fire station, which Newton has definitely tested its fire station. Yeah. Private wells that have been tested, and where there have been triggers of you've reached a higher level above ambient groundwater standards or state standards, or where it's in that modest sort of area.
Okay.
So if you sort of can kind of see the boundaries of Newton, or at least the location of Newton, you'll see some green dots. That means that everything's good, it's met state quality standards. You will see a few areas, and this is along the Southampton-Newton line. My understanding is the former Newton dump landfill. There have been a few triggers of where there is higher PFAS contamination. It doesn't mean that it is unsafe in that area, but they have had a few triggers where a sample has triggered higher than what the state level allows for. So this is publicly available. People can go on. You just need to Google New Hampshire PFAS mapper. It's pretty easy to use. I would encourage you to explore it, or at least I think it's neat. But
I'm going to check Country Pond later. My well's like 10 feet away from it.
So I'll just pull it up since it's here. This is Country Pond. There are certainly areas on the other side of the lake, not Newton, where there have been some triggers.
Yeah.
And I go back to the proposal, but if you want to explore, I'll send you the link later. So we've added things like definitions about bulk petroleum terminals, public water system, regulated substance, what does that mean? Sanitary protective radius, high water table, secondary containment, clarifying what a snow dump is. This is one that triggers in a lot of towns because people don't know what that means. Snow dump is bringing snow that did not fall on the site. It fell elsewhere and you are trucking it in to let it melt and any contaminants that are in it. It's a very high risk use for groundwater. So this is one of the uses that has always been prohibited. We're just clarifying what it is. Addifying stratified drift aquifer ordinance, clarifying what a structure is per the ordinance, transvasmicity, wellhead protection area. So again, a number of definitions. Changing the district boundaries in two ways. The first one is just where did the existing boundaries for that stratified drift aquifer, where did that even come from? The way it's currently drafted, it would be hard going forward for someone who maybe didn't work for Rockingham Planning Commission or didn't know where that source had been to recreate. Citing the exact study as it's presented is a much better way to have this going forward so that you know exactly what boundaries you have adopted. So that's the intent of the first part of the change. Number 2 is adding the wellhead protection areas. Those are the circles around the public water systems. So that's the biggest part of the change. Number 3 on this district boundary, this is actually an existing provision in your regulations to include the areas within 250 feet of Neal's Pond Brook near 108. This is because this is this little bit of a Massachusetts water supply that sneaks into Newton. So you guys are doing you're already doing protection of Massachusetts and Amesbury's water supply by simply having that little provision. It's a teeny tiny spot, but. So all of that is slated to change. We did move around a few things just for clarity. So there is still an appeals process. It's just been cleaned up so that it is clear as to if someone were to challenge where the boundaries of your groundwater district are, the process for doing that and what report you would expect for that process is a little bit cleaner. So that is another change that we've added. The next is we haven't changed minimum lot size or site coverage. Those are slated to be exactly the same, which is that the lot sizing is dependent on the underlying zoning. So it's your typical soil-based lot sizing that you guys see when you see subdivisions, and that no more than 20% of a single lot or building site, it sort of came in with the application we had earlier, may be rendered impervious. There is a process by which someone can go above 20%. They're basically just saying that they're going to be able to deal with the stormwater as any commercial or multifamily site would have to do going through site plan with you. So it really doesn't add a whole lot, it just adds more oomph to it should you need to regulate that. So we've kept maximum impervious coverage. We have increased the performance standards, including site drainage, and really all this is saying is that you have to comply with the with the stormwater regulations that Newton already has as part of its subdivision and site plan regulations. It's just having it be protected via the groundwater resource in addition to covering via those site plan and subdivision applications. If a use is proposed to use products that contain PFAS, we do have an additional supplemental requirement that applicants would have to demonstrate a stormwater pollution prevention plan that is actually geared towards their specific industrial use. That's really to help minimize that PFAS application. You're not, no, go ahead, you're good. Thank you for staying. No, you're good. Another thing that we've added is that for any use requiring a conditional use permit, that is handling, using, or storing enough of a hazardous or toxic substance, they will have to have a spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan. Most applications you ever get will never need this, and it's a little bit involved, so I know it looks very long and detailed. It's not going to apply to 95% of applications you ever get because of the threshold of the amount of hazardous or regulated substances most industries use.
Makes sense.
We have things like hazardous substances have to be stored in proper containers. They have to be secured from unauthorized access. Outdoor storage of regulated substances have to be more than 50 feet away from surface water and 75 feet away from private wells. So basic countermeasures. Containers must be stored in clearly labeled containers. Any land disturbance around inactive wells have to actually be closed in accordance with state law. So really basic measures, but putting them into the regulation codifies it and makes it much easier for the town to enforce that. It's like an ounce of prevention. Number 9 is that blasting activities. So if you had someone that had a lot of ledge on their property as they were going to develop it and they needed to blast, provisions for maintaining that you're not going to be adding conduit to drinking water supply wells, that you're not going to be impacting those. Transfer of petroleum for delivery trucks and storage containers over 5 gallons needs to be done over impervious surface. The reason for that is that if there's a spill of gas or oil, it is much easier to clean up if it's not going to instantly sink into the ground. Gives you a chance to clean it up before it becomes a problem. Number 11, this is going back to that PFAS contamination. If a uses have the potential to release PFAS into the environment, having a supplemental submittal for industrial uses involving PFAS. This would be evaluated as part of a site plan application, and should this get moved to the warrant during the interim between the time where you might approve it, which potentially could be this evening, we would be working on the actual document that is suggested by DES as far as that supplemental requirement. It's effectively a checklist. Number 12 is a hydrogeologic study. This is something that the planning board currently can require of any applicant. You have required it in the past, but the way this is written gives a little bit more information about what type of information you want in a hydrogeologic study. It alerts someone to the fact that on a case-by-case basis, you could require it, and the fact that they are going to have to pay for the hydrogeologic study for a third-party review, should that be something that you need to make a decision on a particular use. You are not going to use this a lot. I think in the years I've worked with Newton, it's maybe been required 5 or 6 times in 12 years. So it's not common when you need it. You have the ability to use it. You've always had the ability. This just makes it clear for someone what the expectations would be.
Okay.
Uses. This is going through to indicate what would be a prohibited use, and you'll note there is not really a lot that is in red on this because we didn't add a lot for prohibited uses. We clarified a couple of things, like for a dry cleaner, if the service is taking place off-site, like the actual cleaning off-site of that location, then it would actually be allowed if it's just sort of a retail. Another one is that outside processing, storage, or disposal of reclaimed construction materials. This is in addition to prohibited uses. These are things that may have asphalt or concrete from construction projects that could have lead, asbestos, other contaminants. This is just prohibiting it in the groundwater area. Asbestos, not so much for groundwater, but lead leaching into groundwater is not typically a great thing.
Can I ask a quick question on this? So
Yeah.
a lot of this language is kind of, hardening up or clarifying
Yep.
a lot of, things that were either already in place or were a little ambiguous maybe.
Yep.
So just to use an example, let's say that there is a yard in Newton that has 15 dump trucks parked at it.
Like a residential yard?
Right, for example. Does this allow the town to have kind of more, I guess, even though that already was against regulation, does this do anything to help the town remedy situations like that?
Yes and no. If something legally exists today, it would be allowed to continue regardless of this application.
Understood, yeah.
If something, I will say, is occurring that is not been permitted, and in order for them to come into compliance with the town regulations, say they had to come to the planning board for a site plan, if it's that type of use, you could use these regulations, if they were to pass, to have better understanding about what the potential risks and benefits are to that site. A bunch of, leaky old dump trucks, based on your,
Just an example.
yeah, just as an
something
example,
easy to,
is not a great situation for protecting groundwater.
right.
There are definitely a number of things in this regulation that would help to minimize the risk. You may still be able to have the dump trucks in a parking lot, but you're making sure that, the stormwater is able to be dealt with. You're making sure that it's kept away from certain wells. You're making sure that
Yep.
they're not doing maintenance of antifreeze on the dump trucks. So there are provisions in here that help to reduce the risk of potentially contamination sources.
This coming under code enforcement?
Just like any other zoning ordinance, there are parts that the planning board would have to go through with approvals, site plan, subdivision, conditional use permits that would apply. If someone is not following their approvals or the regulations, it is a code enforcement issue through the select board. So it works the same like any other zoning provision.
Mm-hmm.
Now, admittedly, some of these are very nuanced. You probably aren't going to enforce them after the fact very easily unless there's a need arises. So if there is a situation where you need to utilize some of the, I'll say, subtler things that are in here, you've written them down. The intent is to have that be clear to administer and enforce. The last item that is an addition, that is a prohibition you don't currently have, is the development of a gas station. Gas stations are pretty high-risk uses for groundwater contamination. This would add prohibiting it. You already prohibited petroleum uses in most of the groundwater, but this is the most common, honestly, just based on where your groundwater is and some of your state roads. There would already be a gas station there if there was demand. You already have gas stations in town that are able to continue. They can even expand, because we have provisions in here that they can expand like the retail use if that's allowed. They can add EV charging stations. They can add a Dunkin' Donuts drive-through if they get site plan approval. It's just adding the gas capacity that wouldn't be allowed. And actually the 2 gas stations you have in town are actually not in your groundwater, even as this is proposed. So
This is an official moratorium on any future fueling stations.
within the groundwater protection district, which does not cover all of Newton.
Gotcha, yeah,
It covers probably 35%
Okay.
land-wise. Adding industrial uses that produce PFAS, if you're trying to prevent PFAS contamination, don't have a manufacturer that produces it, be in your groundwater district. And the other thing is the use of fluorine-containing Class B film foam. It's firefighting foam.
Yeah.
There are certain firefighting foams that contain PFAS, and this is just prohibiting it.
That's what?
This is just prohibiting the use of those firefighting foams. There are certainly other firefighting foams that do not contain PFAS and are actually being slowly phased out.
That's what we were using up until a few years ago. I'm sure the state's timed it all out though.
Yeah. That's the intent. It's causing health issues with firefighters in addition
Because
to...
they supply us with it, so they're gonna give us what we're supposed to have.
All right, so those are prohibited, honey. Shall I continue on?
Yep.
All right. So permitted uses, we kept every permitted use exactly the same. We had to change a couple of references. The only notable change is that for agriculture and forestry, just to make it cleaner for people to understand what could be enforced, saying that agriculture and forestry uses are allowed provided that animal manure, fertilizer, and compost must be stored in accordance with Department of Agriculture best management practices. So we're actually citing the exact manual that we're wanting folks to follow, or any changes that as they revise it going forward. So the next part is the conditional uses. These are uses that, if they meet some of those performance standards we just covered, they meet certain criteria, that they should be able to be done in the entire groundwater district. So we have 5 basic areas where a conditional use permit would be required. And any commercial or manufacturing use that is not prohibited automatically needs a conditional use permit. For many of them, if they are done inside, they're not using hazardous substances, and they meet the stormwater requirements they already have to meet with your site plan requirements, this will have almost no impact. It will be a little bit of paperwork. It will not have any impact on whether they get an approval or not. Using regulated substances of quantities exceeding 55 gallons or 660 pounds, that needs a conditional use permit. It's also saying that it needs a spill control and countermeasure plan as approved by the fire department. Any multifamily residential development. The main way this proposal impacts multifamily residential development is by dealing with stormwater. Any multifamily development still has to meet the stormwater requirements of your site plan regulations. It is no stricter than what they already have to meet. This is just making sure that they're not going to be doing something in addition on the site that would cause potential concern. It's also making sure the septic system is raised enough against the seasonal high water table. Those are the only impacts for multifamily. Residential subdivisions creating more than 2 building lots. That's just getting into some of the things with the impervious surface. You guys actually saw a great example earlier this evening. And number 5 is any sand or gravel excavation or mining activity, if not carried out within 8 vertical feet of the seasonal high water table. Basically, we don't want to be scooping the sand and gravel too close to the groundwater because it increases the risk of contamination to that groundwater. So that's why that applies. We've only ever had, I think, 1 or 2 excavation permits since I've worked with you for the past 12 years, so you probably won't see this very often. When someone comes to apply for a conditional use permit, what are the criteria you guys would consider when granting that conditional use permit? That also has been added. Those include things like the proposed use won't detrimentally affect the quality of the groundwater or drinking water resources. If they're doing those performance standards that we covered before, that's a pretty good mitigation for any type of use. That's why we put them in the regulation proposal. The proposed use won't cause a significant reduction in the long-term volume of water contained in the aquifer or in the storage capacity of the aquifer. Basically, if you're doing your stormwater correctly, you are allowing full recharge of any rainfall or snow melt on your site. So getting to this is a very easy standard for the 99% of applications, unless it's a water bottling plant. Then it's a little bit more difficult. The proposed use won't discharge any wastewater that's more than what a domestic wastewater disposal would be. So if your basic septic system on your house can deal with it, you're allowed to discharge that kind of wastewater. It's not putting anything into a septic system that wouldn't normally go into a typical septic system. So no hazardous substances, no toxic substances. Industrial uses that have the potential to release PFAS require planning board to find that the proposed use has adequate control for limiting PFAS. Most of your applications will have nothing to do with PFAS. So when it's important and a proposal does, especially like manufacturing type uses, have the potential for PFAS, this condition would really kick in, but for the majority of items, this will never have any impact, so that standard is very easy to meet. Number 5, the use complies with all other sections of the ordinance. Number 6, the proposed use may include reasonable conditions attached to the permit. You guys do conditions of approval all the time. This is just codifying that criteria. And then the last one that should be the most of interest to the Conservation Commission, it says that before you make a determination on a conditional use permit, you need to seek input from the Conservation Commission. If the Conservation Commission has an opinion and you have the opposite opinion, when you're making your decision, you just have to state why you're not agreeing with the Conservation Commission's recommendations or opinion. The planning board can do whatever it wants effectively. It's just trying to have it be in regulation that you are attempting to listen to the Conservation Commission. It does not give them any more authority than they already have. No one has to go to both boards. It is simply an advisory connection for the planning board. So it shouldn't slow down any process, it's just making it more formal. We have also expanded the language a little bit about non-conforming uses, that non-conforming uses shall comply with this ordinance, except if the time period for reestablishing the abandonment shall be limited to 1 year. Basically what we're saying is that if a non-conforming use ceases, it has 1 year to be able to come back and exist before it has to comply with these regulations. Any non-conforming lot of record that exists as of March 11th, 2025, that's town meeting, you can do that lot is perfectly fine. You can do all of the uses. You don't have to meet the minimum lot size, which your regulations require. So anything that's a half acre, you can still do all of the uses you normally would be able to do. And then section 6 is the exemptions, and this isn't in a lot of zoning regulations for groundwater, but it comes up a lot. People get very concerned about, what am I not allowed to do because of this regulation? And pretty much you can do everything you've always done. Very specifically for private residents, this has almost no impact. It has little impact if you were to be subdividing your property. Has a little bit of impact if you're doing some agricultural uses because of how you can deal with the manure storage. But the rest of the provisions really have no impact unless you have a large quantity of hazardous substances, at which time you're probably triggering a home occupation or a home-based business. So exemptions. Private residents are exempt from Section 4 use regulations and requirements except for minimum lot size and lot coverage. Any business facility with regulated substances with a capacity of less than 5 gallons, because that's that threshold, are exempt from the regulations. Storage of heating fuel is allowed. Emergency fuels for generators also allowed. Storage of fuel in your fuel tank on your car or your commercial truck, all allowed. Temporary storage of construction materials are allowed as long as they are as part of a site within a 6-month period of their deposit on the site. Transportation of pesticides and sales are exempt from all provisions per state law, and underground storage tank systems and above ground storage tank systems that are in compliance with federal and state rules, all allowed. So lots of little things that people think are hazardous to groundwater, and to some degree maybe are, but we need them to be able to function with our homes and our businesses. Administration. So the provisions of this ordinance would be administered by the planning board. Someone can still seek a variance from good chunks of this ordinance. I just want to be clear on that. The conditional use permit is one aspect for all of those uses, and that falls entirely with the planning board. But if there is a prohibited use, a gas station as we have this proposed, and someone wanted to do a gas station in the groundwater district, they would still go to the zoning board for a variance. That is still what that process would be. This is also an effective date should the ordinance pass on the date of town meeting, and enforcement is really through the select board or their agent, which is the code enforcement officer. So we have that whole track changes version of this. There is an Appendix A clean copy, so you can see it with all of the wording changes, but not all the strikeouts, to make it easier for people to see what would the zoning actually look like if it were to be adopted.
I posted that version downstairs, so that people, if they wished, could read it.
Is it on like our website somewhere?
It is also on your website, but this full document that I've pulled together is also on your website.
Okay.
So it has the background, it has the sort of overview highlights, it has the maps, it has the track changes, and it has the clean version.
Excellent.
So with that, procedurally, we can, if there are any changes folks want, we have time for a second public hearing. It doesn't have to be renoticed. You could do the notice like in the meeting this evening. You can move it to town warrant if you would like this evening. We can make changes to it, but that's sort of where we are with this proposal. It would take a motion for any of those actions, however.
Yep, understood.
I would motion that we take it right to warrant. We've reviewed it, and we've already made some changes to it.
Yeah, I feel like this was really just kind of a review of what we've been talking about for months.
It has been several months that we've been discussing this, but
I'll second the motion.
Now, do we need to give the public any time to react to this?
so that's what tonight is. So this was moved to a public hearing at your meeting on the November 26th.
Correct.
So it's been posted since then. This document was posted, I believe, the Wednesday after that meeting.
Okay.
So it's been available.
Yeah, okay.
I do know that Dennis got a couple of questions from the Conservation Commission, so I'm happy to talk with them if they have further questions. They can also see the full proposal. They can watch the meeting this evening or any of the previous meetings, but I'll just state that I'm happy to come and speak with them if that would be helpful.
Okay, we have a second, right?
Yeah.
You do?
So is this for both of them or just the first one that we're doing?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's a good point. So you can split your vote and just move the proposed changes to the Aquifer Protection District as one motion, and then do the first one we talked about that had putting the overlay districts in there as a second motion, if you're comfortable with this one going first.
Well, I don't want to speak for anyone, but I think we're all pretty comfortable with both of them.
So I guess just clarifying, Bob, that your motion was just to do
For this one.
for the groundwater
Okay, fair
aquifer
enough.
protection district
Yep.
proposal? Okay.
I'll
You're
second.
comfortable with that with
Yeah,
the second?
Second, yep, sure.
Mr. Gibbons?
Aye.
Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Eddy?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
All right.
So now we need a motion for the establishment of the zones.
Yes.
Motion made.
Second.
Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Gibbons?
Aye.
Mr. Eddy?
Aye.
That's unanimous.
And you do have one other zoning proposal.
And that was to strike out the accessory structure over 12,000 square feet.
That's the one.
Within the definition of accessory structure, yes.
Yeah, and I'll motion for that.
That's a,
So currently in the definitions section for accessory structure, the line that you have on your agenda that says, any accessory structure over 12,000 square feet will require planning board approval first.
1,200.
I'm sorry, 1,200. The reason for suggesting striking that out is that there is no process and no criteria by which the planning board would grant or not grant such an approval.
So going forward, it could be an unlimited square footage and it goes past the.
Not necessarily. It still has to be an accessory structure. And accessory structures are, the first sentence that's in that definition is that it is incidental and subordinate to the principal structure. So sometimes an accessory structure can be bigger than the principal structure. Think of a single family home that has a barn behind it. Sometimes it can be bigger, but that use, the residence is the main structure, the barn is the accessory. It's not typical that the accessory would be bigger, but sometimes the subtlety of the situation and how buildings are being used does come into play. But accessory structures are typically detached garages, barns, gazebos, sheds, pool decks, that type of structure.
Indoor tennis court.
Tennis court.
Yeah, 30 by 40 isn't a small, isn't, like not a small home.
No, but keep in mind that any commercial building or multifamily structure has to come before the planning board anyway with site plan. So it's really accessory structures related to duplexes and single family homes that sometimes would come into play. But again, there's no criteria by which the planning board has to judge this. Some towns do have that are applicable to residents. Rules about accessory structures and setbacks and sizes. Happy to have that discussion with you. I don't think we have time.
There's no way to check the size of.
It still requires a building permit.
Yeah.
A building permit.
But he'll have the building department won't have any way to check a size of a proposed structure.
They'd have to have a plan for it.
They have to have a plan. They have to indicate the size of the structure to get a building permit.
What if they want to put a 60 by 100 garage in?
There is a point where it could be questioned, does it even count as an accessory structure? It still has to meet things like structure setbacks from boundaries, wetland setbacks, frontage.
No,
So,
I get that. Okay.
and if there's honestly ever any question, your building inspector certainly knows that he can contact me, contact Jim, speak with the board, because sometimes those situations will arise, but they will be the atypical.
That's what my concern is, do we have a checking mechanism for that? That's all. I'm sure
The basic answer is yes, you do. Sometimes there are questions about how a particular situation may need to be addressed.
Did you make the motion?
So I made the motion.
I'll second it. Second the motion, sorry.
Mr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
and Mr. Eddy.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Okay. I think that allows us to go on to board business here.
And I'll make a motion to accept the minutes dated 11/26/24.
Second.
Who was it? Thank you. Mr. Ryan,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mr. Gibbons,
Aye.
Mr. Eddy.
Aye. And I believe our final item here is to look at our 2025 schedule.
And I will make a motion to adopt the 2025 planning board schedule as posted. The only date that's on it that's really questionable, again, next year is right before Christmas, would be December 23rd, but we can always cancel that if there's no important business. Because the only other one would be in July, and the 4th of July is on a Friday next year. So the one on the 8th is actually the following week. So if anybody goes away for the 4th of July, we should have no problem getting a quorum to be able to conduct business.
Mr. Gibbons, was that a second?
Yes, I'll make a second on those, sorry. Then I had a question.
Mr. Ryan?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Gibbons?
Aye.
Mr. Eddy?
Aye.
Jim, do we need to take care of anything with this
That-
document you made?
That's the final thing.
Okay.
Gentlemen, in the past 3 days, there have been a number of questions, concerns, and what have you, from tenants and future tenants in the southern New Hampshire Industrial Park, I believe is its technical name, on Puzzle Lane. There was I've been in discussion with the building inspector to try to find some way of reining things in, because neither he nor I have any evidence of certain units ever having received even an occupancy permit. So what you have before you, which I sent out, was developed in 2007. It was used for the next 11 years. Up until we had a building inspector who did not like it. He thought it was
We're just gonna say simply that it was discontinued and it was no further being used without proper authority. So what we are proposing is to bring it back and to start using it again.
What I did was I retyped the entire thing so that it was more legible. Believe it or not, what you see on 2 sheets used to be basically on a single page. Meant you had very, very tiny text. But these are all the same questions that were originally asked. There are a couple, like, will alcoholic beverages be served or sold, that I'm not certain we need to continue, except for the fact that if you have another place like the hen house that moves in, you know, that to me would be a red flag if they check yes and they say that they're a florist shop.
Just as we were saying about. You know,
I also
dry
had
cleaners,
everything that you
they can
see
move
in the subtext, so that, where it says, if yes, please attach plans, permits would be needed. Those are actual requirements.
It's fine the way it is, just leave it like that for now,
Okay,
and we'll roll with it.
okay, so, go ahead.
There are some communities that they often will call it like a change of tenancy form, so that if different businesses come in that maybe don't need like change of use approval from you guys, that the town is still able to track what that business is. It's very similar to this, but they have, I know of a couple of examples that might be a nice fit for Newton to consider. It doesn't have to certainly be this evening, but it's something we can work on in 2025 a little bit, if that's of interest.
Sounds good.
The big change is that I added an application fee simply. At one point, these were sent out. Mr. Marchand has a copy of one of the original letters that were sent out. These were originally sent out to every business in a commercial zone in town. And then there was plenty of time for them to be correlated, and I don't know whatever happened to them. Application fee would have to be added to your fee schedule, and it does not need to actually exist. but that's up to you gentlemen to decide. I put it down as a starting number. It could be $50, it could be $100, but as the cost of doing business, there are towns around that charge an annual, they require that this be filled out for every commercial unit in their town, and there's a monetary charge.
And what are they charging? The same, that $200?
Yeah, how do you come to that?
I think East Kingston, charges possibly $50, but I will say they have significantly less businesses than you do.
Yeah.
But they do require an annual permit, so.
I'd wanna check what the other towns were charging, just to get a comparison.
I can do that. I did this quickly yesterday in order to get it
Yeah,
on. What I will do, if you don't mind, is I'm gonna take off the application fee, because it's not presently on our fee schedule.
right. And then check on it, and then the next meeting we can, discuss it.
Right, but in the meantime, for the 3 people that have been before,
Go with this for now.
I can
Without the
work with
application
this, I'll
fee.
take that off.
Yeah,
I know some towns charge you by way of the inspection. There's an inspection fee.
But that, if you notice on the back, I added a place for the building inspector to sign off,
Yeah.
because he has the ability to request there's a name for it, something warrant, where even if they deny him access, he can,
Yeah, that's good.
and I can't remember, because I don't have the option. He has the ability to go into places even if they say, no, we don't want you looking at what we have.
Now, is this the actual, this wouldn't be the actual occupancy permit, right? This is the.
No, this is not an occupancy permit.
Would there be a sign off from the fire department and conservation?
it's for like a change of purpose.
Yeah,
Or
and to know what's actually going on.
right,
They were originally, as Mr. Marchand has the letter, they were originally sent out to everybody that was in a commercial unit, requested to come back. I found a few of them, but I have not found as many as there would have been for that time
Going forward,
period.
in this process, would a fire representative, like, go and inspect the sprinklers and
That should be part of the occupancy permit.
Right, okay. As long as that's in there, and then conservation too. If applicable, at least they know what's happening with the new business, they can just sign it at their desk, or they can do a site visit and sign off,
So conservation wouldn't have the ability in that situation to have any, honestly, say. They would be able to have say if something required planning board or zoning board review,
Right.
though. But like
So-
an office going to a retail use, there wouldn't really be conservation involved.
So I will use these on
But there could be, well, I'm just thinking in terms of.
these are already established buildings and stuff like that, so any
Yeah.
setbacks, anything
No, I
to
know
the
that,
wetlands and
but
stuff.
they're using substance we don't know about, well, whatever. I'm just used to a different, more detailed.
Yeah, this is used for existing buildings, or it would also be used on the new building that was discussed at the compliance hearing tonight. One of their conditions of approval is that any new tenant has to come before the planning board for a change of use permit. This would be the start of knowing,
Okay.
What's going on there?
Okay, so I will take off the application fee thing at the bottom, and I will start using them.
Yep. And then we can get one established for the beginning of next year.
Well, I've got to redo the fee schedule.
That's what I mean, yeah.
I normally
Yeah.
do that in January. But I can also put this down as something that you did this year
Yep.
for your end of the year.
Jen, where are we at with you and the grants? I know
That's right, that was,
we just got turned down for the...
yes. For the housing grant that we had applied for, back in September, was not successful. Of the 7 or so communities that I assisted with applications, they only funded any applications that were working on a housing needs assessment, which is what you guys worked on with your master plan chapter, or a regulatory audit, which we also did in the last grant round. They only funded 1 out of the 7 applications I worked on for doing regulation implementation. That has been pretty consistent with all of the applications that New Hampshire Housing received. They had way more requests of funding than they had funds available to grant. So.
What do you think they based their decision on? Do you have any idea?
I don't. I'm actually surprised at the limited number of actually implementing regulation projects that they funded, because from my perspective, you've had those conversations now. Let's continue them and keep that momentum going. I think it's actually not the best way for them to have decided to use their funding.
They're kind of doing themselves a disservice.
So I'm a little bit disappointed in the outcomes of that, but RPC is continuing to try to, especially communities that have been proactive, look for funding sources where we can. I mean, just under my existing circuit rider contract, there are some small things that we can definitely work on for next year. Accessory dwellings, maybe consider like expanding where duplexes are allowed, just for some low-hanging fruit. We can work on that with existing.
Yeah.
But we are looking for other opportunities to work with towns, because it doesn't make sense to have done all of that work to not actually implement the change that we're,
So have we exhausted all monies now for the grants that we got?
There's a little bit left for the groundwater, because we're not quite done that, but effectively, yes.
But for next year, we're
for next year.
effectively done.
Yeah, I mean, there still might be grants that we could apply for and receive in the next 6 months. I'll certainly be keeping my eyes out. I do think there will be more housing grants coming, but when and how much, I can't say.
So next question is, do we have a figure yet for your contract for this coming year?
You are currently in a contract with us through the end of June. That's already been billed for and is in your budget. And we also notified the town about the increase that we would have come July 1. I'd have to go back and look at the figures offhand. I don't know them, but there was
If you could, send that to me, please.
Sure.
In case you tell through the loophole somewhere, so I know about it. Seeing as we're doing the budget right now.
I went through and calculated out what, based on what the expenses were before we got the HOP grant. And we're basically back up to looking at it approximately $12,000 to $12,500.
I will say, you have not had a lot of applications in the past 2 years. I mean, you certainly have had applications, but you haven't had a lot of big applications. We're seeing that sort of across the board. It's really because the interest rates are so high for borrowing money that most applications we're seeing are generally smaller in nature. That actually means less time that you need me, because your meetings are shorter and there's less that I need to review. So we only charge you the time I actually spent. So if there's not a need for a meeting, just to save, or if you don't need me for a meeting, I'm happy to have my evening back. So, I mean, we can work with you on whatever budget constraints while still getting you the technical assistance you need.
Wherever I can, I try to take Ms. Rowden's hours out of the applicant's NEPR?
Yeah, so larger applications, the way your town engineer charges you for his hourly fees, we do the same thing. It's just if they're very minor applications, the home occupation being that level,
Right.
I'm not gonna charge him separately for the, 15 minutes I needed to look at his application. Something bigger, like 125's big subdivisions, those obviously take a lot longer, but.
Right.
Motion to adjourn?
Sounds good. Let's adjourn at 9:05. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh.